I'm Carl Steinitz. First of all, let me begin by thanking Shannon for the 6th time in allowing me and my colleagues this time period. It has an enormous advantage, and the advantage is that we can talk as long as we like, as long as the audience is prepared to listen. And we don't have to follow any particular rules or protocols. This session has about an hour or so of presentations. We won't take questions, but we're all going to be here for the next 2 days, and we're available to answer your questions. Why? Because there's a dinner afterwards, and everybody needs to go home anyway. There are 2 big ideas in this presentation. The first one is based on a talk that I gave last year here about the need for geodesign to rapidly improve the dynamic performance of the tools and methods that we're experimenting with and applying. And this is especially true when you're dealing with a large, complicated, contentious, long-term problem where if you're thinking, let's say, 30 years or 50 years ahead, you can't presume that the analysis of 2017 is the same as the analysis of 2057. And that process has to be one that is integrated and updatable in every aspect. I said last year, if something changes, everything changes. And the question is, how do we do it? The second big idea is that in the last 2 years, we've done about 30 projects, gotten involved in about 30 projects. And the vast majority of them purposely start out with people disagreeing, and they end up having to agree or deciding not to agree. And that process is typically one of negotiation. And it's increasingly obvious to me that negotiation is a design tool. And that the idea of a zero-sum game, in effect a competition, as the way to decide something that's really important, is stupid. Because basically you've got a group of people who have different interests, and if many of them decide they're losing, nothing will happen. So there's some satisfaction, some satisficing is the technical term. Satisficing your interests through negotiation is the ultimate design tool in most of the projects that we've done. And those negotiation strategies very frequently, most of the time in my experience, fall into one of 3 classes. And I'll describe them in these diagrams. The first one says you have multiple constituencies: old people, young people, farmers, industrialists, environmentalists, and bankers. And they each have a different perspective on the future of a place. And somehow or other, you've got to build a constituency that incorporates the vast majority of them, but enough for every of them that they won't take you to the Supreme Court, basically. That's the first one. That's called the multiple constituencies problem. I've invented these names. I have no idea who else has done this. But that's the multiple constituencies problem. The second one is, should we do it or not? Or is the population going to double or is it going to quadruple? And the question is, what difference does it make? And in the end, you're making a design that somehow has to make a compromise between no and yes, unless you really want it to be a zero-sum game. And then you have to draw a design out of that. And so it's a process of saying, I've got a yes group and a no group, and in the end I've got to decide what to do, and I don't want the no group to take me to court or the yes group. I want them to figure out how to live together. And this is the Palestinians and the Israelis. This is the Turks and the Greeks. This is any kind of conflict sort of situation that you can imagine. The third one is the multiple jurisdictions problem. And that is, does the regional plan tell the towns what to do, or do the towns tell the region what to do? And how do they negotiate that process? And if you understand that diagram, it gives you the first step in figuring out how to structure a geodesign problem. But you have to understand how decisions are made and what the crucial issue is. It's not done the same way all the time. It's a function of how the end game and the decision model interact. And at least these are three models. This is my talk from last year, in which I talked about the dynamics of many things. It's on YouTube. If you're interested, look at it. The work is done based on the idea of collaboration, and it is basically aimed at the how, second iteration, and the what, where, and when, third iteration, when the problem is specifically long-term and has to be iterated over time. In other words, the idea that you're designing in space is important, but you're also designing in time, and you're designing in money, budgets. And I'm lucky enough in the last year to have worked with colleagues who are here, except for one, on three problems of the many that we've done, which illustrate perfectly these three models. So tonight we're going to see Chris Pettit showing a multiple constituencies problem. Ana Clara couldn't come. I'm going to show a sensitivity problem. Basically, should we close iron mining in Brazil? The third problem, Lupita, who's the director of the agency, and Brian are going to show the Georgia coastal problem, which is 10 counties who have legal responsibility seen from the perspective of a regional agency who has to supervise that process. Now, the work follows a workflow that Rishi Balal and I and Steve Irvin have been working on for about, in my case, with Rishi, 5 years. And I've lectured about it. But there's a difference in this diagram. And that is, it's not just a question of how do we make the design. It's a question of what are the time and cost implications, and how do we move it into one of these three negotiation paths. And we're supporting this. Now, in order to do that, the software that supports that workflow, as many of you know, but some of you don't, it's cloud-based, it's free to use, and it's being used. But what's important about it is it has nothing in it. There are no data, no models, no nothing. And the user and the problem have to define those and bring them. And of the many projects, not many, but of the number of projects we've done, there's always a lead-in from GIS. And since I'm a guest here of Esri, I can basically say that every single project that we've done starts with Esri's data collections and GIS. It doesn't have to. One of our projects, only one, didn't do that. And at end game, we've had the end game through the API in GeoPlanner, in City Engine, but in Community Viz, in all kinds of software systems that can take simple diagrammatic ideas and build them at the property line scale and at greater detail. But our idea is not to go into the detail business, but to keep things very simple, but iterate them complexly over time. And that's what I want to demonstrate in this. The inputs have to be a study area, a set of demands, a set of 10 or more or less system models, which, by the way, are in an ordinal judgmental scale. And it's done by experts. It's not a public process. It's not done by sliders. A set of very simple impact models, cross-impact models, and a cost model based on 6 or 7 different kinds of construction and maintenance processes. These are some of the dynamics. And we're increasingly linking these dynamics. The first one is you can set boundaries. You can take a region, press on a town, and the entire set of the study and everything that goes on afterwards is focused on that town. So in Lupita's project, She's responsible for region. There are 10 counties. Each county had its own design, and then they had to figure out how to merge them at the regional level. So boundary slicing of the entire project is a very important dynamic, and you can flip very easily. It takes about 10 seconds to flip between them if you're so inclined. The second one is that we work in diagrams. The diagrams can be generated from a GIS. It's a one-button import. Or they can be drawn. And there are processes, there are projects, and there are policies. The difference is that a project is a solid color and a policy is hatched. But each system has its own color code. It's an imposed language. And you'd be surprised how easy it is to learn an imposed language of color, and that allows people to talk together. Each diagram has attributes. It's like an object. It has type, boundary, policy or project, size, shape, location, a starting time for implementation, a duration time of implementation, an investment cost, and expenditure in any year, system impacts, cross-system impacts, a color legend, a 3D shape, and a scale. If you pick a set of diagrams into a design, and you do that by pressing a button and it's in the design, the evaluation in one button called Update Assessments can change. So this assessment changes to this one changes to this. And it's simply the question of, maybe this is the first 5 years of your design, you press a button, you update the evaluation models, and you make your next 5 years of design. So you don't keep a set of maps throughout a project. It changes anytime. Or you put the green infrastructure first, and then you see what it does to the housing evaluation. We've linked the design, the impacts, the timeline of any project, and the cost. And we've had people in the last 6 months designing in space, in time, and in money, and it interacts. It has API links to external models, and it speaks in almost any language. And in fact, we've used diagrams as input to Community Viz, because Community Viz has about 50 different indices that carry land use with it, like how many firemen do you need and how much water do you need for that amount of people. There are negotiation tools that are really, really important and really, really useful. And they allow you to parse a design and focus on where the negotiation is. We have our own 3D viewer. It's diagrammatic. It's a one-button thing and it's done. It takes about 10 to 20 seconds. And this is one that is recent, but it's really interesting. We can track any diagram and its history through a design. In other words, this is the DNA of the design. We know when it came in, we know when it was edited, we know when it disappeared. In Chris's project, the Australian project, the first case, we had 480 diagrams. On the first morning, we had 150. Not one of those 150 were in the final design. That's actually very interesting. So the first design is never a good design. It always will change. So there are 3 case studies. The first one is a case study on the eastern suburbs of Sydney, Australia, and it's Chris's project. Chris, come on, we're ready to go. Tell them who you are, Chris, and then you take over.
Thanks, Carl. I'm Chris Pettit, so I'm a professor of urban science at the University of New South Wales in the City Futures Research Centre, and I'm very jet-lagged. I've just flown in last night, 24 hours on the plane, but it's really good to be here and looking forward to the summit, and it's been really good to work with Carl and the team on this. Any other Australians here? Okay, so I can say, was going to say this anyway, but the case study we're presenting here tonight, it's the first geodesign case study in Australia. So very happy to be working with Carl and Tess and Harishi on this case study. So it's based in Sydney. Have to come visit. If you want an excuse, we have a Locate GIS conference in April, plenty of conferences, or you could just come for a holiday, come see the Opera House, come see the fireworks at the harbour. It's a pretty nice place. It's middle of summer now, so it was hard to actually leave the beaches and come over here for this weather. But very keen to learn what's going on in geodesign over in the US. So that's our study area, and we've got about 5 million people living in Sydney, and there's a lot of growth happening. There's a lot of first world issues and problems. We've got housing affordability is a key driver. We have tourism. It is booming, so I shouldn't be promoting it, because being a resident there's all sorts of conflicts with people coming in, backpackers taking over some of the beaches that we have. You've heard of Bondi Beach. So that's one of the beaches we have up here. And so we've got a number of beaches. We've got the airport, international airport. We've got our major ports. We've got Botany Bay, where Captain Cook came in 1788 and came and settled Australia. So we've got some historical sites. We've got University of New South Wales, so one of the largest universities in Australia. We've got about 55,000 students on campus, which is also linked to a hospital, 4 hospitals. So it's been picked up in the strategic plan for Greater Sydney as one of the employment clusters. So that some of the key drivers, we've got the CBD up here, that's the Opera House there, and the Harbour Bridge. And we've got the Centennial Park, so some big parkland like Central Park, basically. So this was the first geodesign workshop that we had in Australia, and so we had Carl set the scene. We invited people from various walks of life, from across the government sector, from private sector. Ernst Young hosted this workshop for us. We had a couple of hundred people there. It was a debriefing for those participants that we had turn up the next day. And I should mention too that this all sort of evolved. We have a relationship, City Futures Research Centre, with CASA, the Centre for Advanced Spatial Analysis at UCL, where Carl is now a professor with Mike Batty. And so I've been working with Mike for the last 10 or so years, and been doing work around planning support systems with Dick Klosterman's What If tool and some tools like that. And Mike said, you've got to get Carl over. So we were fortunate enough that it fitted into Carl's schedule with Tess and Harishi, and hopefully the rest is history. So we then managed to find 30 lucky participants that we could lock into a room for 2 days and throw away the key and get geodesigning. And that actually is something that I want to just talk a little bit about, because there was a lot of effort to get actual practitioners. These weren't students. There's a handful of academics. I could have easily filled the room with academics, but we didn't want to do that. We had some key academics, but we had people from key agencies. So we got Sydney Water, and so we developed water systems working with them. We had a couple of key private sector groups, Arup and EY. We had the councils there, so Randwick City Council, Botany Bay Council. It went across jurisdictions. We had the Land and Housing Corporation. We had the Greater Sydney Commission, who are in charge of the strategic planning for the whole of Sydney. We had Transport for New South Wales, who are obviously in charge of our public transport, our active transport, urban growth, looking at state development, Department of Planning and Environment, even the Department of Education, who are in charge of school planning. So I guess the major output from this was bringing various agencies together, breaking down those silos. And in Sydney, and I guess this happens in many places around the world, we do strategic planning in silos. So Sydney Water have their own plan for 2050. Department of Planning have their own plan for 2050. Department of Education have their own plan for 2050, and so on. And so we actually bring them all in the room, and they're actually looking at a sort of systems thinking geodesign approach to coming up with a common plan that they could all agree to. So there was a lot of work behind the scenes to get them all there, a lot of letter writing, a lot of speaking to secretaries, ministers, and so forth, because trying to get busy people in a room for 2 days is no mean feat. So we succeeded. We got a number of people there, and it was really positive. So I don't expect you to read all this fine print, but I'll just pick up a couple of points here. So we've got a lot of growth happening in Sydney. Basically, by 2050, we expect to be at least 8 million people living in Sydney, and our study area per population is going to double by 2050. So there's a lot of pressure going on in Sydney.
This is a completely built-up area that has to accommodate 300,000 more people.
And so housing affordability is rocketing. We have huge immigration rates, so there's huge land supply, land demand issues, and also then squeezing our existing green infrastructure, what we have left in our parks. So there's no agriculture in this study area, but some major issues in how we actually use the space that we've got efficiently. So we had 6 scenarios, and these scenarios, I won't go into all the detail of those scenarios. There's an environmental scenario, so loosely around the Brundtland structure, triple bottom line. We've got a developer scenario, so laissez-faire, let the developers reign supreme, build up 20, 30-story buildings. We had the University Hospital Employment Cluster scenario. I mentioned before that's in our strategic plan for Sydney. We had the Just City approach. So Sydney is very multicultural. We have over 200 different ethnicities living in Sydney, and we're very proud of that. And so how do we plan for a Just City? So we had that as one of the key drivers. We have tourism, recreation. Sydney is a bit of a hot spot for international tourists to come in and to see Bondi Beach, to see the Opera House, to see some of the other features that we have in Sydney and around. And then we had a compact city scenario, so really trying to look at transport-orientated development and maximise the density benefits. So we did some work, my team did some work, a lot of preparation work behind the scenes, doing some GIS preparation, using ArcGIS and other tools to bring the data sets in and set up these 9 evaluation models, and also importantly getting the economic values. And so this is still a work in progress, but picking the brains to getting the true economic values for each of those land uses. So if we're going to put in a new metro stop in US dollars, that's $200 million. So if we have the geodesign team putting in a new metro stop, it's a pretty expensive building in Australia. You put in one new metro station, the people in that workshop need to be aware that's worth $200 million. So also you're putting in 5 stops, you can do the numbers, it adds up. So that was an important component in setting the scene, and I'll hand you back to Carl.
This workshop took 2 days, and it basically had 4 parts. In the morning, we proposed diagrams of policies and projects. In the afternoon, we made 2 versions of the design, one of them including time and money, the second one. The next day, we did negotiation that was informal in the morning, and we did negotiation that was formal in the afternoon. I'll go fast through this. So the first was a tutorial, and each one had a tutorial. Each took 20 minutes. So it took us about 20 minutes to explain how do you look at the evaluation models, and how do you make diagrams, and how do you express ideas, and learn the color code. We basically had some places that were constrained from development, and we let people understand that we had done already a little bit of work on the first version of the evaluation models for green infrastructure, blue infrastructure, meaning the water system, tourism, education, commerce and industry, high-density housing, middle-density housing, basically vehicular transit, and basically pedestrian and bicycle transit. And there they are making diagrams. The space, by the way, is very important. Movable furniture, coffee outside. They made the diagrams, some of which are GIS generated. And now it's 1 o'clock in the afternoon of the first day, and I'm talking about how do you make a design. And there they are, working independently in teams of about 5 people. And by the way, they learned real fast. These are serious professionals. They knew exactly what we were trying to do. They didn't have any difficulty explaining what a diagram was. They had no problem whatsoever with the software. They may have only met their colleagues for the first time at that event. By the end of the middle of the afternoon, each of the teams had a design of the diagrams and had assessed its impacts, either in system impact or in cross-system impact. Purple is good, positive impact, yellow is sort of neutral, and orange is bad. And they knew how much development they had, they knew where they had their problems, and they could, at the middle of the afternoon, change their design. At 2:30 in the afternoon, we introduced the idea of timelines, scales, and 3D. Each diagram has a starting date and a duration of construction, in effect. And each diagram has a cost, because we have typology costs built in from the research that Chris' team did. And we had a previously defined set of 3D shapes for different kinds of diagrams. And so in the afternoon, what was interesting is that the second version of the design, they were designing in time and money as well as in space. In other words, what you want is a diagram. See the black line down here. You want something where you're spending money in the beginning in infrastructure and then getting a lot of private investment to be coming in and working itself out over a 20-year period. So that's actually a very good financial diagram. And we saved all of these, and this is the first version, and this is the second version. This is the first version, this is the second version. So by the time the afternoon, 5 o'clock came about, they'd made at least 2 versions, learning from the impacts and the time and the money. Day 2, 9 o'clock in the morning. Each team has to describe its strategy and its design to each other team, because what we want to do is negotiate on the basis of similarity. I want to know what you're doing so I can steal some of your ideas or trade you some ideas. So this idea that my team is private is not everything is public, everything can be shared. A good design idea is one that ends up in the final version. And to be in the final version, you have to build a coalition. So then they're making at 10 o'clock in the morning their third version with negotiation as needed. So up there, she's trying to convince these people to put the transit station where she wants. And we make a third version, or a fourth, or a fifth. In the afternoon, after lunch, we give a tutorial on comparison tools and negotiation tools, of which we've built several. One of them is a simple chart that shows what you're trying to do, what your design is, how much land is in each land use, what the impact is in each category, and what the cost is, and what the elements of your cost is. And you can show it in 3D if you want to. What this says is the streets along the trolley system should be commercial. Red is commercial. Make lively streets. That's what that diagram says. I don't need to say more. I can't say more in this. One of the techniques is combined analysis. Basically, that's every diagram that every team in its last design used. And if you see the color code and you see it, you know where there's agreement. And when you see muddy colors, like on the left, the red and the blue, you know there's disagreement. It's very useful. This is diagram frequency. This is counting how many teams used each diagram. And you'll see green infrastructure 3 was used by 5 teams. So maybe it's a good idea. So there's a tool that says, show me where 6 teams agreed, where 5 teams agreed, where 4, and you can say, show me immediately where we agree, so we don't have to worry about that anymore. Then there's a tool that is called side by side, where 2 designs can be side by side, and you can parse it for the housing, and you can focus on where they're similar or different. Or you can basically look at the actual diagrams that are in this design and basically say, I'll give you number G4 if you give me G7. And then there's a sociogram. This is at 2 o'clock in the afternoon on the second day, where each team has to judge whether it can work with every other team. And they can either be a partner, possibly a partner, not likely, or never. And what they do then is each team presents, and each team judges, and they judge whether they can work with the other teams. And then I basically analyze it. And I can see that the top team was a double plus, a potential partner of every other team. So they're the most powerful team in the negotiation. This is called a sociogram. And then if I give you 2 pluses and you give me 2 pluses, like these 2 teams, maybe we should negotiate right away and get going. And so this allows you to structure a negotiation among disparate designs. And there's a technology about it. They each have each other's diagrams, they each have each other's plans, and they can sit next to each other and talk, and one person can keep control of what they've decided. And so they first negotiated. The developers, the environmentalists, and the compact in one group, and the university and hospital, public facilities, and tourism in a second group. And they each made one design. There they are. And then we had a second design negotiation, and these were the agreements. And these start out to be agreed. A basic green infrastructure system, a basic blue infrastructure system, including a new sewage treatment plant, and making public access through the entire oceanside edge of the city. And now the 2 teams at the end are deciding what their strategy is. And that took half an hour. In other words, these people had to negotiate with them, and they better figure out what they really want versus what's soft. And now the negotiation is public. It's really public. The first team presents, the second team presents, and then they're negotiating system by system. System by system. And during the course of the hour that it took them to negotiate, they must have made 50 or 60 negotiations and changes in the design. And those are recorded, in this case by Rishi. That's the last decision. They had everything done except exactly where the subway station should be, where the metro station should be. And they made that decision. And so this is the final design. That's its impacts. That's how much they did and where the problems are. And it's not perfect. No design will ever be perfect. Come on, go forward. That's the budget. And it's not a bad budget. It says, get me a lot of money for public infrastructure, green and blue, and transit. Then assume that that's private money, and the private money is going to go pretty fast between 2020 and 2026, and then it's going to basically build itself out. And this go back. No, it's work. Go. That's the staging down there. That's the first stage, public infrastructure. The second stage will be a lot of housing and street improvements, and the budget and everything slides with it. And you can zoom in on it, as I showed you before. It's an active tool. You can zoom in on it as you wish. And you can zoom in, and that's the university and hospital complex, that's the port area, that's the beach area, and that's the famous golf course. And you can zoom in on it, and you can do what I said before, that none of the original diagrams were in the final designs. And this is the strategy. And Chris, tell us what's going on with this. That's at the end of 2 days.
Yeah, we're pretty pleased to get to this point in 2 days. And as Carl was saying, there's 480 projects and policies that were created. And this was the final scenario that actually was agreed to by participants. It won't actually be implemented. It was agreed to in light of the workshop that we ran, because being the first workshop, we had participants attending to understand how could we actually then use it in earnest. These ideas have gone to the Greater Sydney Commission, though, and I guess we've got the university here, we've got extensions of the university, we've got this spinal transit going down from north to south, extending. There's an old jail over here. So that was, as Carl was saying, that was the big debate. Do we put the metro down here or does it go at the university? And even though there's a lot of university people there, the consensus was, and the agreement was, it goes down here. It made more sense with this old jail that's going to be redeveloped as medium and high density. So we've got the green corridors there. What we can't see at this resolution, and we actually got in at quite a fine scale, and we had people from active transport designing better walkable, cyclable road infrastructure. So there's actually quite fine scale designs embedded in this that I won't go into. So we're very pleased with the output here. And we also evaluated, being a university, we have to evaluate these things. So we put the ethics form in and we got this feedback, 3 key areas that we evaluated and asked the participants to rate us on. And really, how did they find the process is the first area. And we'll see we've got close to 60% found it somewhat easy, some found it easy, some found it fair, none found it difficult. So that was a big tick. We asked then your team's interests, were they addressed? So did people actually have their designs? Do they feel part of the process engaged? And their views listened to, and similar results. A little bit more somewhat difficult has made its way in there. We got 5%, but no one disenfranchised with the process. And then we had some positive feedback on the final proposal also. So overall, some very positive feedback. For the end game, we had one of our key decision makers, the Greater Sydney Commission. We have one of the commissioners there, Rod Simpson, who's the Environment Commissioner. He turned up for the end game, as did a couple of other senior executives across government. And these are some of his comments. I'm not going to read them out. They're up there, but basically he has been very impressed with the process, to see what could be formed by bringing all these agencies together, breaking down the silos, and we're now in conversations in how we can actually use the geodesign approach and supporting software in earnest across about 3 or 4 possible projects moving forward. So I think overall it was a success, and we've been very pleased to have Carl and the team over. Thanks.
Ana Clara couldn't come, so I'm going to go this lightning fast. This is a 7,000 square mile region of Brazil. When you walk on the ground, you're walking on iron ore. It's the largest iron mining complex possibly in the world. It produces 1/3 of the wealth of the state of Minas Gerais. You can see it from the air, from the satellite. It's basically, 4,000 square miles. This is Belo Horizonte, a nice place. It's reaching its edge, and when you look over the edge, you see open pit iron mines. That's an open pit mine. It's a mile long. And when you look in the other direction, that's what you see. That's 15 years later in remediation. And in the middle of it is Ouro Preto, a World Heritage Site derived from the 16th and 17th Portuguese mining, which opened up this part of the region for mining and exploration. On November 5th, 2015, 2 dams collapsed in Minas Gerais. It poisoned a river 500 miles long. It killed lots of people. That's the Atlantic Ocean. And BHP, which is the largest mining company in the world, faces a $41 billion lawsuit, and 23 people are indicted for murder because of the failure of the dam. This is a very big, serious problem. Ana Clara was able to organize a workshop with representation from the government, the local government, the mining companies, the association of mining companies, the environmentalists, and especially the very powerful, publicly oriented environmentalist NGOs. Off the record. So this is not on the record, this workshop. It was done privately to see whether a negotiation could take place. The people in it were Vale, which is the mining company, the Valerec Mining Company, the Geopark, the Nuclear Development Agency, the Brazilian Mining Institute, Belo Horizonte, the private sector, the cultural heritage people, the geological people, and a group of professors, basically, who were the NGO leaders against the mining. The issue was this: should Belo Horizonte stop the iron mining by the year 2050? And what's the alternative? 10 evaluations. Urban pressure, hazards, hydrology, vegetation, historical and cultural and visual, mining and industry, low-density housing, high-density housing, tourism, and transportation. And it was organized so that 3 teams would look at the trend. What would happen if nothing happens? And 3 teams would make the most radical proposals they could, 2 of which, one in each group, were aimed at maximizing development, maximizing environmental protection, and maximizing social benefit, defined as what? As a balance between environment and income. We did a workshop. We made diagrams just to show you. A lot of these diagrams were GIS developed. Again, it's Esri's biggest customers are this mining company, among other things. So they were making designs. One of the diagrams is, let's build out all the mining areas that are potentially mining areas. That's a diagram. Let it go. Go dig. And we did that at the very first diagram. Dig it all. And it has impacts not only on its own system, but on all other systems. And if you map those impacts, you can understand that the environmental models are going to be against you, but there are economic and social models in favor of you. And so that's very interesting, because you could use the models to replicate political attitudes. So we made a design, and we made a second design, and then Rishi used an allocation set of models that we have. We basically have a set of models that say, you may want it, the design may want it, but do they want it to go? Do they want to go there? So this is a very old idea. It's at least 60 years old, where you can actually say, let's predict where they will go, given what information they have about whether they want you to come there. Then day 2 in the morning, the 6 teams made presentations. And then what happened after that, they started to negotiate with each other at 10 a.m. And these are the 6 final designs. 3 of them are trend with a T, and 3 of them are alternative, radical alternative with an A. So we had 2 development teams, 2 environmental teams, and 2 social teams. And they then were negotiating. In other words, the 2 development teams negotiated, the 2 environmental teams, and the 2 social teams. That's basically the triangle of the Brundtland Report, the 1987 UN conference. And those are the 3 negotiated maps. This is the environmental design. It has only 3 mines left. That says close the damn things. This is the development design. Build the damn things. And this is the social design, which has some. And now we're in public. Now this is the final day at 2 o'clock. Now we're in a room with everybody. And what's very interesting is the GIS-based stuff is on the right-hand side of the screen. On the left-hand side is the mining company's 3D viewer, which I think is underpinned by Esri products, but I'm not sure. It's a Brazilian company that built it. And what they're doing is negotiating, and this took 3 hours. So on the left is the existing conditions, on the right are the policies proposed for 2050, and those are the projects proposed by 2050. And now we're going to show it in 3D, but we're going to show it in 3D like CinemaScope, because they brought in at least $250,000 piece of equipment, which is a CinemaScope projector, and everybody had glasses. And this is what it looks like. This is what it looks like if you... I'm gonna go here. Now, show me this. Come on. Something's... Maybe I can't do that. All right, there it is, there it is. Do you see, look in the middle. See the toggling of the diagram? And what we're actually doing is we're toggling from our software right into the 3D, which means we can actually design the whole thing in 3D. I have no idea what's going to happen as an outcome of this project. No idea at all. But it's the first time that these people have gotten together. And I'm sure this is going to go into the courts forever. But the simple idea that you can negotiate off the record on a very, very, very serious problem in a design environment. You get what you want, I get what I want. The end game was actually an interesting compromise. It was to close down everything that is from the first third of the mining, just because of the safety of the technology of the time, and actually to add 1 or 2 mines for every one that you close and let it continue as a mining. That was the outcome. But the idea that this could happen at all was a miracle. The third case study is the coastal zone of Georgia. Lupita and Brian, come on. And Lupita, you first, I guess. Introduce yourself, and we're doing tightly in time.
Okay.
That's life. I can.
Look, you go ahead.
Me first? Okay. Good afternoon. I'm Lupita McClenning. I'm the Director of Planning for the Coastal Regional Commission. And the Coastal Regional Commission is a multifaceted agency, and we do comprehensive planning, local planning. We also do specialized planning with historic preservation, transportation planning, and economic development. And I'm very pleased to be here today. This morning, I was making my way from the auditorium to the cafe, and at the intersection, I met with a car, and so I waved him on, and then he waved me on, and then I waved him on, and then he waved me on, and he finally got annoyed and sped on. And as I was crossing, I wanted to say, "I'm sorry, I'm from Georgia." Tractors and trucks and boat trailers don't stop. So if you're in this room and that was you, I'm really sorry. I forgot how pedestrian friendly the world can be. It's not quite as friendly in rural Georgia. So the coast of Georgia is the last eastern seaboard in the country that's not overly developed. We have 100 miles of pristine seashore, barrier islands that are not developed. We also have 2,300 miles of tributary. And equally important, we have a thriving tourism trade. We have ports. We have the Kings Bay, which is our nuclear port, and we also have Fort Stewart, which is the fastest deployment to get our troops headed in that direction. So we have a lot of competing interests between our economic engines that are running the area and our environmentally sensitive areas. So if there's one takeaway from my brief presentation, it's simply this. The way that the physical layout or the land uses of your communities are planned is fundamental to sustainability. If that's your only takeaway from my presentation today, that it is key to sustainability, it's fundamental. And with the tools that we have and with our Geodesign tool, it expressed that even more so. So I'm not sure if I hit this. Did I hit that a couple times?
No, you got it right here. This is the advance button. This one.
Does that one go back?
That goes back.
Okay.
That's back.
Okay. So when we first started this program, I was invited to be a participant, much like you heard earlier folks speak, and we participated as a regional commission with the University of Georgia. We have a partnership with the University of Georgia through a memorandum of understanding, and so we were invited to participate, and with Carl and Rishi and Rosanna Rivera, who's not here today, we participated in the Wormslow State Park. From that experience, I went back to the Regional Commission. I explained as best as I could what happened at the Geodesign workshop, and talked with Carl, talked with Rosanna, met with Brian, and prepared to do a Coastal Regional Commission. The Coastal Regional Commission, we have 10 counties, we have 6 coastal counties, and we have 4 inland counties. So we have the coast, and then the more rural agriculture counties that we worked with. So we invited a group of people with different areas of expertise who proposed and synthesized and conceptually came up with some design scenarios for the coast of Georgia. So the topics that we addressed are, by the way, not very politically accepted, which is sea level rise. It's not accepted by either our governor, and it's not accepted by the state of Florida's governor. In fact, the state of Florida's governor, Scott, said you can't even use the term sea level rise in any planning documents. We also had ecology and conservation, transportation, housing, historic and cultural resources, and commercial and industrial development. So designs were made in 3 iterations. In the first iteration, each team acted independently and only for their own interests. Teams delineated areas for planning policies and proposed projects for implementation, each working on their own with their own interest. In the second iteration, teams shared with other teams through a very open forum, and then returned to refine their own negotiated designs. And in the third iteration, teams were required to negotiate with the regional team, which was, I was representing the regional team with my colleagues, and with the goal of working toward an agreed final strategy. And because of the importance of land development as a driver of other impacts, especially the physical environment and the impacts from that, investments and decisions utilizing tools like geodesign should really basically be always be made. And I'm going to come back and talk a little bit about some of the insights that we have from our geodesign process after Brian gives you all the heavy lifting that was done before. So.
Thanks, Lupita. I'm Brian Nolan, professor at the University of Georgia, and I've been involved in two of these workshops. The first one, as Lupita said, involved Chatham County, which is one of the 6 counties on the coast. Chatham County includes Savannah, so that's the northern end of this strip on the coastline, which, as some of you may know, is one of the largest or fastest expanding ports on the East Coast, bringing container shipping into the United States. So a huge economic driver, a lot of industry relocating to that area. So we've got economic pressures as well as, I won't say the forbidden terms, I will say ground level falling problem that we have along the coast. So in order to do this workshop, we came up, we needed to look at a scenario. This was the first time that Carl and Rishi had worked on a problem taking 10 counties and looking at them in a single regional context. So we already knew it was a complicated design problem. So what we wanted to do is wanted to have a fairly coherent scenario structure for us to look at. So we took US Census data, which gives us projections of population for the coast. A couple of features you will see in there, though. So the top figure is coming from the US government in terms of population projection. The second figure is from the demographics associated with this ground level falling problem. And a guy called Matt spaced out as a Matt Herto at my university, University of Georgia, has looked at nationwide the projected population displaced by these coastal changes, which amounts to about 5 million people nationwide. In the state of Georgia, it's about 100,000 people. But of course, that adds to the in-migration that we already have as a result of this economic development, second fastest growing area in the state of Georgia. We have another possible wrinkle on the whole thing, which is that one of the major space corporations is looking at a spaceport on the southern part of that coastal strip, using a former industrial site, so there's no immediate sort of impact in that sense, but as you can see from the numbers, it creates a lot of economic and housing-related change in that area. In order to put those figures into something a little bit more concrete for the participants, we drew some diagrams. Most people in the workshop knew what the historic core of Savannah, Georgia meant in terms of area, so we basically projected that out to represent the areas of additional housing of different sorts, the industrial, commercial development, etc., that needed to be located. So we'd given people almost like a drawing set. You know, you've got to locate this amount of... Oh, I'm sorry. Let me do that. That's the historic core of Savannah. Many of you that have taken historic or architectural history classes will know that layout with the famous squares. That's that historic core down here, and then projected out from that. These are the amounts of development that we had to locate within this regional plan. There is some background information. We had green infrastructure projections from Esri and from a variety of other sources. So we had a number of already made projections of change in the coastal area that we could use as background to our decision making. Impact models. Carl has already described those in the past, but the impact model production is actually a pretty hefty process in its own sense, conducted by myself, Rosanna Rivero, it's been mentioned before, and Alison Smith prior to the meeting, with greater and lesser difficulties within them, but they correspond to this broad identification of places that are suitable development, places that have to be protected from development. So I'm going to go through, again, we've got the process of the presentation, but I'm just going to hit 2 or 3 points throughout here. You've seen these before. 10 counties, we divided up the room into 12 groups actually, 10 county groups and 2 regional groups, one looking at the region from an economic development perspective, the other looking at it from an environmental conservation perspective. My prompter. Many of the participants, as you saw in the previous 2 projects, there are a few academics scattered in this workshop, probably less proportionally than for the previous ones you've seen, but many people from the counties themselves. So we have 10 counties, and in all but a couple of cases we had people that were directly representing the county government and the county organizations in those different locations. So we had the people of the place were participating in the workshop. This is the first stage, and the one thing I wanted to point out to you here is the difference in the diagrams. So the different shapes and forms and emphases of the diagrams that are picked by the 10 different groups. These are just a selection from those groups. And then the other aspect is these are the decision models that were created at the beginning part of the workshop. And you can see from those that there's a lot of dissimilarity between the way that the groups identified their decision models. During day 2 then, we took the models or the ideas, the design ideas developed in the first day, and it also went through a process of negotiation. You see here a lot of group-to-group negotiation over the differences principally between people who were adjacent to each other. Because by this time we'd seen that, my model for my county is going to look really odd when it comes up against your model for your county immediately adjacent. And by the end of that day, the second sort of iteration of the county level models, you can see a lot more similarity in the look of the of the designs themselves, and also a lot more similarity in the shapes of the decision models. So through this process of negotiation, this second round, we're developing a lot more sort of coherence and understanding amongst the groups. And from that, then, we have a series of design models looking like this. Looking at those, as again Carl mentioned, we can look into each of these designs, and through the second stage, we looked into each of them and evaluated the differences between them. Again, looking at the different diagrams that we use. In this case, you'll notice again, you've got some like historic and cultural number 8 used by 4 of the groups, whereas many of the other ones are only used by 1 of the groups. So this gave us a sense of where there's corresponding sort of interest in the different models that were being developed. As I said before, we had two separate groups working at the regional level, and these were their initial stages of their designs. And again, you see a lot of difference between the conservation and the regional development. And this is really the difference in the way the groups operate internally. The group doing regional development had a lot more individual models, particularly in this commercial and industrial area. And you see them down here. They got into a lot more detail, whereas the conservation group was dealing with a lot more broad brush environmental strokes. Those groups negotiated, and they negotiated in the midst of all of us. So the 2 groups are sitting down at the table with their 2 models in front of them, and all of the remaining participants in the workshop were there to sort of offer ideas coming from their individual county models. And in the course of that, one important thing emerged. In the course of looking at these regional level models, there was a discovery that in Camden County, and this is the county where the spaceport is likely to go, in about that location there. This is Cumberland Island, which is one of the least developed of the Barrier Islands. This is the Okefenokee, highly, extremely important from the point of view of environmental conservation. So, whereas the diagram that had emerged up to this point indicated that it was possible for housing development to occur in this area, one of our local experts at this stage put his hand up and said, we've got habitat there. We've got vital habitat, including sea turtle habitat on the coast, that is heavily dependent on this area for its resources, and was able to immediately draw a diagram that reshaped the 2 regional diagrams that are emerging out of this process. Again, negotiation. In this case, sort of getting the compilation of all of the different plans and bringing them to these are the ones that we think are the right ones to go into these final regional plans, and then breaking those out. These are the final set of county level plans that now correspond to the overall regional development plans. And Carl. He remade the corridors. And then we made it again for sea rides. Let me tell you this. Look at the light green. That's if you have an agricultural policy. That changes again. Right here. Look here. Okay?
Excuse me.
That means
Your mic went out.
okay, I know. But this raises, at the end of this workshop, there was a really interesting question that came up. On the left is the existing evaluation based on the Esri green infrastructure data, which we had access to at an early stage. And I'm very grateful to Hugh and his people and Arantxa for giving us access. This was the baseline connectivity from Ryan Perkel's landscape structure model. Those are the things that were lost because of the development to 2050. This is the redesigned corridor in 2050 without sea rise. This is the redesigned corridor with sea rise. And it raises a very interesting question. For what year are you going to build the conservation strategy? When you know that if you build it for today, you're going to lose what you invested in due to sea rise. That's an interesting question. And how can you make a conservation green infrastructure based only on today's data? The people were really very good, the representation. Lupita, did anything happen?
Can I just say it from here, sitting down?
Be brief.
Okay. With the insights from our geodesign workshop, the process of codes and policies that shape how communities grow was assessed, and we can properly plan and describe strategies that jurisdictions can use to encourage sustainable growth. Also with the insights, we had opportunity to understand the scope and character of future development, identify existing and emerging needs, and assure that issues are addressed so communities can continually revitalize. And the way that we sold this to the commission, to be able to use our final design when we work on the regional plan and when we work on a comprehensive plan, on local comprehensive plan, is by the definition of identifying existing and emerging needs and assuring that issues are addressed, built environments become livable, ecosystems healthier, and the benefits of improved environmental and economic development become more equitably distributed among the region. I mean, it's just that simple.
Have the patience to spend another 10 minutes, because what you're going to see now is really, really different. And when I saw it for the first time, I was very happy. There's no other venue for doing what Barty has done.
Okay. Do I got it? Okay. All right. My name is Barty Warren Kretschmar. I teach bioregional planning in the Department of Landscape Architecture and Environmental Planning at Utah State University. And I was here last year, and I talked about a project that we had done in Cache Valley with local planners and academics and students to look at Cache Valley and how we could keep the rural character of the valley while doubling the population. So what we had at the time was an EPA environmental education grant, and we were looking at geodesign as a environmental planning learning module. And so we first tried it with graduate students, both design students and also planning students, to see if we could get them to collaborate and to speak the same language with each other. And last time I presented the workshop that we did and how we evaluated, and what I'd like to talk about is the next step in that research. Just as a reminder that the graduate students put together, all that preparation that Carl has just shown and has been in all the other projects. I have to say this project is really of a whole different scale. We're talking about Cache Valley, Utah. It's 70% Mormon. I think there are about 120,000 people that live there. But because people have large families at a very young age, we're looking at a doubling of the population by 2030. We carried out this workshop, as I said, with local planners and agencies, and then we decided to take it into the high schools and to see if high school students could develop their own vision. I feel very, very strongly that our young people are the ones who are going to be living the visions that we're creating now, and so they really need to have a say in what their future looks like. So we thought, why not? And we went into a charter school in North Logan, We had 2 classes of 9th grade geography students, so there were about 25 in each class. I took 5 graduate students with me from the bioregional planning program, and we had 3 sessions, 2 1.5-hour sessions, and then a 50-minute session. So what I'm going to show you, we did in about 4 hours in the geography class. So the graduate students who had done the prior geodesign workshop became sort of the coordinators of the teams. And we simplified. We reduced the number of systems. We reduced sort of the change assumptions that they had to meet, or their targets. And we studied it with pre and post surveys. So, First day, first hour and a half, we had 5 change teams: biodiversity, water, commercial development, agriculture, residential development. And you can see they were in groups of about 5 or 6 students. We introduced the software. They explored the different evaluation models. And then they started making diagrams. Each group prepared at least 10 diagrams of projects and policies. We explained what that was, gave examples, and then they started creating. And by the end of the 3 sessions, they had created 120 diagrams in one group and 142 in the other. Some diagrams had more substance than others, but as you can see, they had no trouble with the software or the tool. And then we changed it up on the next day into change teams. So we had young families and farmers and environmentalists and developers and old folks. And once again, the graduate students were the conductors, and it was, very interesting for them to be leading these students through the process that they had basically gone through. They each created at least 2 versions of a design, and then that was the end of the second day. And these are their final designs. And there's some of them are very. The orange is development or residential development. That's along. You can't see the base map, but that's where residential development already is. That's where the groundwater is. They were thinking when they made these diagrams. And then on the third day, they had 50 minutes. Each team gave about a 3-minute presentation. And the other teams had to listen. They had a little chart, and they had to decide who they wanted to work with. So they could rate the other teams based on how good they thought their diagrams, or their designs suited their own design. And there you can see Rishi is Skyping in. There's Rishi and my colleague Carlos Licon. I should mention that we were doing this together. And he could ask questions, and they responded. There we go, just a sec. So these were the 5 groups and their diagrams. They could compare them. That's the point at which the workshop ended. They all had access to it. They could go home and look at it on their own. And what we did was we took the diagrams and policies that were in most agreement and put them into the 3D viewer. And you can see here where they put their housing. And this is what the students came up with in basically 4 hours. But I think what moved me the most was sort of they filled out their questionnaire, and we looked at their comments, and they liked the group work, the collaboration. It was fun to collaborate with my classmates. I liked how we interacted, more hands-on. I liked that we could work together as a team and do some role playing. So the software really, it does work. Okay, here we go. I liked working with the nerd software. I liked the design of the software. I really liked how interactive the software was. But, you know, the thing that really got to me is what they said at the end. We got to help influence something. I enjoyed how seriously we were treated and that our opinion mattered. We got to design and think for ourselves. I really like this workshop because it gives us a chance to really stop and think about what our future will be like. So, the software was intuitive. The students expressed a feeling of empowerment. The high school students presented thoughtful and really well-defended proposals. They understood what they were talking about. And my graduate students had an opportunity to become teachers. So thank you. There you go.
What she's done is important. Thank you for coming. We'll be around to catch us for questions. And thanks for staying.